As of December 31st last year, 58,733 wildfires across the country had burned more than 7.13 million acres, according to the National Interagency Fire Center. Arizona, California, Oregon, Washington, and Colorado were among the states most susceptible to wildfires, but they are no longer alone, as drought conditions have impacted other states. The devastating Marshall Fire in Colorado ruined nearly 1,100 residences in Boulder County. And as communities rebuild, resilience has moved to the forefront of design. Joining us today is Ryan Downs, a senior planner with Wold Architects and Engineers, which has been working with clients to develop wildfire defensibility measures that allow residents to move back into their homes with more confidence. Welcome, Ryan.
Thank you, John. Nice to see you.
Ryan, why are buildings and other structures more vulnerable to damage from wildfire these days than in previous years?
Sure. So let me just start by saying, here at Wold, we strive to make a tangible difference in the communities that we serve. We do this by offering facility design expertise in a variety of public safety building types, whether it be police, fire, EMS, 911 dispatch. So as you had mentioned, the Marshall Fire, really tested the local community's resiliency this past winter. Mm-hmm. So as a public safety architect, it's more critical now than ever for us to understand these external threats, that are facing our communities and present design strategies intended to mitigate those. So, to answer your question, we really see this as falling into three major buckets right now, that being density, leadership, and global warming. So let me just take a second and kind of dig into each one of those. So, okay. We talk about buildings being, more susceptible now in previous years to fire, certainly in our local area here. Density is a big problem. It's a zoning issue. Buildings are being planned and allowed to be built closer and closer together than ever before. And this is driven by economics, not safety. Right. And so really understanding the density of the neighborhoods that we're designing and building in is critical. Buildings can not only catch on fire and catch their neighboring building on fire more quickly, but with density also becomes, wind tunnels. And as we know with the Marshall fires, that wind was the other part of the equation with fire. And so, really understanding the density in which we choose to lay out our communities. Secondly, it would be leadership. Community leaders aren't necessarily focused on the topic of community resiliency as much as they may be on, sustainability or human health and well-being. So we really need our community leaders to start to understand this value of resiliency and become champions for those initiatives in their communities, in order to bring forth this new era of thoughtful community planning with resiliency as a core value. And then third and finally, global warming. We can't deny the fact that our Earth is changing and the natural disasters that come from that, whether it be wind, drought, storms, fires, we're just experiencing the extreme patterns of this global warming. And these events are affecting buildings and their surrounding landscape more than ever before. Mm-hmm.
What are some of the design measures for rebuilding that your company has recommended to make structures more fire resistant?
Sure. So there's there's kind of the technical component to that. We have to adhere to building codes and requirements and other guidelines that are specifically designed for, protection of structure and property and life. But at Wold, we like to go a little bit even above and beyond in this area by really knowing what is the trends, knowing what's happening, and then educating our clients, always bringing that bigger picture view into the perspective of those that we're serving, so that we can really identify and highlight what the issue or challenges are with a particular project's positioning within a community resiliency plan. We do a lot of 911 dispatch and emergency operations centers. And so, these facilities need to be maintaining operations through any type of event. Yeah. And so, they are the epitome of a hardened structure. They can withstand, high winds, flood, earthquake to a certain extent. And so we leverage these building materials and strategies in our designs in a way to really try to influence the community to be more resilient. We also emphasize, the use of non-flammable materials, certainly on the exterior of buildings. This goes back, we've used a lot of precast products in some of our 911 or emergency first respond type facilities. It has this durability and ability to withstand, the fires and the winds at that level. Sprinkler systems, certainly providing protection to a building itself. We don't, having that sprinkler system makes all the difference in the world, even if it's a residential building. So, at Wold, we try to just infuse this conversation of resiliency and fire protection into our design conversations with our design teams and with our clients. And it's really just part of our overall planning process.
Mm-hmm. In the past, the big knock against fire resistant structures has been that they look like bunkers, and the question that I was wondering is whether or not aesthetics and fire resistance can coexist.
Absolutely. So fire resistance design criteria, and the way we approach aesthetics is really no different than any other building code restriction or zoning ordinance criteria that we would have to address in the most thoughtful way in order to get the project done. So, it's not so much that we feel that we can't achieve aesthetics and fire protection. We can achieve both by understanding the true nature of the material that we're studying. So it goes back to, I don't know if you're familiar with the architect Louis Kahn, but he was very interested in understanding the truth of a material, the integrity of the material. You can't do things with certain materials if it's not true to that material. So in that spirit, we infuse that here. And if we're studying potentially fire resistant materials for an exterior building, whether it be precast or prefab or some other type of non-combustible, it's really around understanding where can we exploit and leverage this material's aesthetic quality in a way that is appealing, and ends up working. It's important to understand the limitations of fire resistant material too, in terms of the overall functionality of the space. Yeah. So fire protection systems can be eyesores or unaesthetically, appealing. I guess the last part of that is, our building codes and our code officials do afford design professionals certain incentives if we can design in certain fire protection strategies, whether it be a sprinkler system or, we can receive relief from one code criteria by having a more robust fire protective system.
Mm-hmm. How about the issue of cost? Does wildfire defensibility impact the rebuild's price tag?
Yes. So, cost and budgeting is going to always be a challenge. And it's really about understanding the community, their priorities, the leadership in the community's priorities. The way that we deal with cost and budget, especially when it comes to resiliency or hardening of a structure, is that we have built into our design process a budgeting strategy that allows us to address the priorities with our clients at every step, every milestone during the design process. We're constantly looking at the priority of fire protection with how much it costs, with how much available resources we have. And at the end of the day, sometimes it just comes down to appetite of a client for risk, because, balancing fire protection with cost is about priorities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Has your company tested its design defensibility strategy? And if so, what have been the results?
Yeah. So, we've been fortunate, and our clients that we've designed hardened structures for have been fortunate that they haven't had to experience, a direct hit by an earthquake or other fire or natural disaster. We do rely on established, FEMA standards, OSHA standards, best practices that we apply to our design processes, so we are always trying to understand what the available and current standard is. Secondly, understanding the needs of our community and ensuring that they're well positioned for the unthinkable. It's what we are passionate about. We've helped many communities prepare, even though they haven't necessarily had that particular building tested or not. We're helping educate those communities, and really positioning them for the unthinkable event. And so, whether or not to decide to harden a building or not, really certainly comes down to cost and priorities and values.
Do you think that the strategies that you've devised is the goal to impact codes at a certain extent, at a certain point?
To impact codes?
Yeah.
Well, the thing about codes that I think as most designers, that are designing in the built environment learn pretty quick is that a code is a bare minimum. It is a bottom of the barrel threshold. It attempts to be inclusive, but it establishes that bar very low. And so at Wold, we identified the building code for just that. It is the bare minimum to protect life and property. And so we challenge ourselves to go above and beyond that. And it's not so much that we would like to change the code, but we would like to continue to influence our industry and our profession.
That's really the point I was trying to make.
Yeah. Bringing that influence in, making sure we're all kind of looking at the same big picture criteria, and really understanding that we can do a lot more than what's being prescribed to us now.
Ryan, aside from what you're doing internally and with your clients, what can communities do to create a more resilient neighborhood, more resilient area?
Mm-hmm. So it really comes down to collaboration, I believe. I believe at its core, it's about info sharing. It's, the really cool thing about resiliency is it's scalable. And what I mean by that is we can design and build we can design and build a resilient home. And if we design and build a second resilient home right next to it, and then again, all of a sudden we're building a resilient street. And then we can add another street and build a resilient neighborhood and so on. And so it's really about getting these folks down from the neighbor to neighbor level of citizens all the way up to your city and county leaders to really talk about what is appropriate for this particular area and what is a reasonable cost to expect to pay. It's about response time, and a lot of the buildings that we focus on are expertise, fire stations, EMS, police stations. It's about when an event happens, making sure that that facility and the folks that are manning it are responsible for response time. Sharing communication channels is another way that communities can really make themselves more resilient. That was a challenge in the Marshall Fire, was that a few of the different emergency manager dispatch systems were not communicating effectively for whatever reason at the time. And so just not being able to share real-time information can be a major detriment. So bolstering up your communication channels, ensuring that we've got good response time and that we're collaborating with our neighbors in the best way possible.
Ryan, thanks for taking a couple minutes to talk about this subject. Obviously, it's affecting a lot of people these days. I'm sure our watchers are very interested in this.
Very much so. And if I could just make one closing point,
Sure.
Leave the viewers with one takeaway. It's that this conversation about community resiliency, it's just starting. It's just in its infancy. As design and building, construction and management professionals, I believe that we're accountable really to get this dialogue started with our clients. It really starts with us. We need to always be willing to educate those that we serve in a humble way. And I believe that the sense of community is such an important aspect of our human condition that we need to do our part to design and build stronger, more resilient places for us to work and live. So I really appreciate your time, John. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thanks again for your time as well. And thanks to our audience for watching. This is John Caulfield from Building Design and Construction.